Good morning. Sorry I'm not able to be with you this morning. My family is traveling this weekend to be with my brother and his daughter who is graduating high school. I know it's not often that I take 2 Sundays off within the same month, but this is a busy season for all of us with family commitments such as high school graduations or college graduations and so on. I will be back in the office on Tuesday. If you need to reach out to me, I'll be around then. Special thank you again to Mark and Ellen who are leading again this morning on my behalf and making worship a wonderful experience. Thank you to Janice for the great music selections again today. Sorry I'm not there. I was really looking forward to singing our closing hymn today. So I'll just have to sing it with my family on our own. And you all will enjoy that one, especially today too. One of the favorite television shows of mine and of many others for over a couple of different generations now has been Star Trek. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. To boldly go where no one has gone before is the summary of their opening statement, where we see the spaceship zooming off for this week's adventure. Gene Roddenberry, who was the creative force behind Star Trek back in the 1960s when it first came out, wanted to craft a vision that was hope-filled and a vision that demonstrates what it looks like for a diverse group of peoples working together. Not only a diverse group of peoples from here, our planet Earth, but a diverse group of peoples from many planets, all working together, striving to accomplish great things, overcome great problems, and so on. Being that it was a science fiction genre, Gene Roddenberry and his creative team were able to tackle a great number of social issues that were set into the guise of another planet's problems or a struggle that a different group of peoples were dealing with, all to show how working together brings those solutions and brings new harmony and new ways of being together and solving crises. It was a revolutionary show for its time. It had not only women on the bridge as part of the officers, but it had an African-American woman. It eventually incorporated a character who has Russian ancestry, and in the 60s, especially here in America, there was strong animosity towards Russians. We've come a long way, haven't we? 60s, it was revolutionary. It's shocking we still need that revolutionariness today. Here we were, though, with this show that has endured for many, many years and many iterations. Numerous movies now, numerous other TV shows have come out, and all attempting to demonstrate hopefulness and show us what a newness can be. There's a lot of similarities in that Star Trek TV show to our book of Revelation. John of Patmos was writing in the late 1st century, and he was using a genre of literature, a very specialized genre of literature called apocalyptic writing, which uses a lot of symbolism and a lot of other very analogous things to sci-fi, demonstrating what newness can look like, bringing about a vision of hope, and showing us what living in harmony can be. Here, as we enter into the final 2 chapters of Revelation, and we will cover these 2 chapters today and the next 2 Sundays as well, John is getting to this final vision. And it's a vision that he's been alluding to. Remember, he started his letter by saying to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, Jesus is coming. You can't stop it. It's happening. It's coming. And let's talk about the process between here and there. And John has written about how the ways of the world are going to keep trying their darndest to rebel against the ways of God, and God will continue to win through not overwhelming might and power, but through a sacrificed lamb. And so in many different ways that he has explained this, in many ways that feel like a sci-fi novel, we now come to this vision at the end. And here, John, in describing a new heaven and a new earth coming down and replacing the old earth and the old heaven, John is making a reference back to ancient literature for the people of faith. He's referencing back to Genesis, when, especially in the second creation story, Genesis chapter 2 and chapter 3, when we've got the first man and the first woman living in that garden and all the happenings going on there. In that garden, the vision for God, the Creator, was that we would have a space where God as Creator and humanity and creation could coexist in harmony. God walked amongst the trees with the people. Adam and Eve, who were those first people in that garden, walked amongst the trees with their God. They saw God plainly. They were able to communicate clearly and directly with God. They understood God's wishes and desires and dreams for the harmony of Creator and creation. But something broke that relationship. Something that we label sin, something that comes through temptation, and volumes and volumes have been written on what that means, but the harmony that God envisioned and dreamed would be there was broken, and creation, as we currently are living it, was set in motion. John of Patmos is saying that vision, that dream that God had all the way back then, God hasn't forgotten it, and God is going to bring it about, and God is going to bring it about in a new way. And again, at the center of this vision is the sacrificed lamb. And in this vision, now God, who is completing the work of creation, is going to put away all things that rebel against God, and the newness, the full, complete newness of all creation is going to be here and now. Now, in John's day, when he was writing this in the first century, he's writing this with a political backdrop of the Roman Empire, which believed it held the fate of every person and of all times in its hands. The Roman Empire believed it was descended from the gods, lowercase g, gods, that they believed in, and that through their military might and power and wealth and status, the harmony, the Pax Romana, was going to thrive and succeed everywhere. But the cost of that was the domination of those who didn't agree with the Roman Pax Romana, who didn't agree with the Roman Empire, who didn't believe in the Roman gods. Everyone who was against the Roman Empire had to be squashed, had to be put down, had to be destroyed. And you could only be in the Pax Romana if you lived it according to the Roman ways. John's illustration is that God's kingdom is a different way that is very much standing against all those Roman ways. Because here in this kingdom, in the kingdom that's brought in by God, the rule is by love, particularly the sacrificial love. It is by diversity working together. It is by seeking harmony through solving crises together. It's by lifting up those who are struggling. It's by saying that everyone has value, worth, and a place in God's kingdom. This small sample size of God's kingdom values stands in direct contrast with the ways of the world, with, in particular in John's day, the Roman Empire. But John says, here it comes. This is happening. God is coming, and God is going to once again dwell amongst God's people right here. We aren't being swooped up into the air. Popular phrase is being raptured, right? That's a relatively modern understanding, right? The concept of rapture wasn't really first thought of until the late 1800s when that strain of theology was basically invented. But nobody's getting raptured, vacuumed up off the planet into something else elsewhere. No. John of Patmos says no. Right here, this is where God is coming down to us here in this space to make his home with mortals here. And here, God's kingdom is going to take root and thrive and succeed, because here all will be fed, all who thirst will have that thirst quenched, all who hurt will be healed, all who have needs will find those needs satisfied, and there will not be distinction between any of us. We will live in harmony, even as we solve the different crises that we still will face. Here we are 2,000 years later. Here we are in an era when we still need fanciful literature and media to illustrate this for us, to demonstrate for us what it looks like for us to live in harmony and to grow and into this relationship with God. We still need shows like Star Trek to give us great hope. The same hope that we found in Revelation, having been written 2,000 years ago. But just because we still need hope doesn't mean that hope is entirely lost. It is here. God continues to find ways to make his home right here in our midst. For us who gather here in this space, we can point to this very space and say, here in this sanctuary, God makes God's home with God's people. We being God's people, we being the ones who experience the Word and receive the sacraments, here we experience God. But this is not the exclusive place for God's home. This very month, we are attending to our vision and purpose in the form of supporting the Teen Recharge Center here in town. This Recharge Center, located over here on South Main Street, is a center where youth are able to be. They can hang out, they can gather with friends, they can participate in classes that teach them life skills, but in fun ways. There's cooking classes that have been on their calendar here for May, for instance. The Recharge Center has laundry services. The Recharge Center has games and activities, and different ways for mentorship and support for the youth to be found. This is a place where God is making God's home with God's people. Now, perhaps over there at the Recharge Center, they may not be able to use language like God and Jesus Christ and all the faith kind of dialogue stuff that we do here in this space. But that doesn't mean that God isn't making his home over there with God's people. We limit ourselves if we say God can only be found in spaces that look like ours, that sound like ours, that lift praises like we do. We limit ourselves if we say the only mortals who can experience the newness of God must recite the same prayers we recite and support the same causes we support and receive the right belief training that we receive. For there is an infinite diversity out there, and an infinite way of experiencing God who dwells amongst us, an infinite way of experiencing God making all things new again, of God saying, you have value and worth and belong. So our being here is one of those ways, and our supporting the ministries that take place here is one of those very valuable ways, and our supporting places like the Recharge Center is another way, where we see God making his dwelling here, where this vision, where God feeds and satisfies the thirst and wipes away tears and brings healing, can be. It doesn't have to be science fiction. It doesn't have to be fanciful biblical language that has varying and wildly differing interpretations that people fight over. It just has to be in a place where love is experienced. It just has to be in a place where those who have been cast aside by the empirical forces of our world are told, no, you are welcome, you are valued, you are loved, you have worth. We are here to support you. When we think of the book of Revelation, we do think of it as the end. In fact, we get the phrase, I am the Alpha and the Omega, right? The beginning and the ending, right? The first and the last. So, Revelation, it's the last book, and so it's often seen in that way, that, this is only something that can happen at the end. In the meanwhile, we just trudge along and deal with the ways of the world, and so be it, and every so often we gather and lift up our voices in song, and it's all good, right? Revelation is not the end. Revelation is the moment. It is the present moment. It is the here and now. It is today God making God's home here amongst God's people. You and I are part of God's people. People who are not gathered in this sanctuary are God's people. People who gather at places like the Recharge Center are God's people. People who gather at the bars, at the casinos, at the sports venues are God's people. People who gather on golf courses and in forests and on trails, or on lakes and on ponds and on boats, God's people. God is making God's home. Are we going to open our eyes to the diversity and the wonderful ways in which God has made home with us, and partner with God in the bringing about this new creation? Much like God dreams for creation, much like God dreamed for creation within Genesis at that Garden of Eden, much like God continues to dream, are we going to fall victim to the temptations of the serpent to try to run the world our own way and shrug off any suggestion to the contrary? The invitation for us from John of Patmos in Revelation is to join with and partner with the God who is making home with us here today. Let's accept that invitation and continue to create a present and future that is filled with hope and love for all. Amen.